Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Work program. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I am the founder and executive director of GlobalSF. Just to introduce GlobalSF, we are a not-for-profit organization dedicated to paving the way for international businesses to locate, invest, and grow in the San Francisco Bay Area while helping locally based companies expand into global markets. Through a public-private partnership with the City and County of San Francisco's Office of Economic Workforce Development, GlobalSF oversees the city's initiatives called China SF, Latin SF, and SF Asia. GlobalSF is also an SBDC affiliate center, which means we can provide advisory services at no cost to our clients. You can contact us at info@globalsf.biz or visit us at www.globalsf.biz, B-I-Z. A few housekeeping items. Before we start the program, today's program will be a conversation with two experts in their field of HR and architecture and design. Q&A will be available at the end of the conversation. Please feel free to enter questions into the Q&A section. We will be asking our speakers to address your questions, so please do not hesitate to enter them. We will not be looking at questions entered in the chat section, so please remember. Today's program will also be recorded, so if you missed something or want to share today's program, you will be able to access a link to today's recording later on. Contact information for the speakers will also be available in the recording. And as we proceed, today's program, as I mentioned, is about the future of work. We will be addressing the concerns that employers and employees alike are thinking about. What is the impact of the current changes with, I think, more than 70% of the working population now working from home? And how does that impact their jobs, and how does that impact the workplace? So today, we have our partners, TriNet, as well as Gensler. A little bit about TriNet. TriNet is a professional employer organization, a PEO, that provides small and medium-sized businesses with full-service HR solutions tailored by industry. To free SMBs from HR complexities, TriNet offers access to human capital expertise, benefits, risk mitigation and compliance, payroll, and real-time technology. From Main Street to Wall Street, TriNet empowers SMBs to focus on what matters most, growing their business. And with full transparency, they are also the PEO for GlobalSF. We love working with them. And now about Gensler. Gensler is a global architecture, design, and planning firm with 48 locations and more than 6,000 professionals networked across Asia, Europe, Australia, the Middle East, and the Americas. Founded in 1965, the firm serves more than 3,500 active clients in virtually every industry. Gensler designers strive to make the places that people live, work, and play more inspiring, more resilient, and more impactful. I know them from designing the Shanghai Tower, and I think Shanghai Tower is still the tallest tower in Shanghai, right? Beautiful. And you guys are headquartered in San Francisco, which is also great. I want to introduce our two speakers today. And after that, once we start, I would like to invite each of you to say a little bit more as well, if you would like. A little bit about Darby. Darby Starnes has 20 years of experience covering all aspects of human capital, human resources, and starting out as an HR manager with a small business. She leads the strategy and content team for TriNet and plays a lead role in projects. She manages the adoption, execution, and implementation of the company's customer-facing programs designed to give TriNet clients the best practices and resources they need to aid in their navigation of the ever-changing HR landscape. And Kelly. Kelly Duvassar is a design director, senior associate at Gensler, who has been helping the San Francisco Bay Area firms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Udemy, Sophie or SoFi? I keep on saying that wrong. SoFi, there you go. Everyone remember, it's called SoFi, not Sophie. Zendesk, Postmates, etc. And to reimagine the workplace in our new normal, she has worked with clients all over the United States and a number of overseas countries, including India. Are we ready for today's conversation, ladies? So So this is a launch point, right? We're here to imagine what the workplace is going to be like and how that dovetails into future technologies. We thought that San Francisco was so special, and it still is. And primarily, a lot of the younger generation, in particular, love living in the city. They love the able to meet during lunch, after work, happy hour, and to be able to collaborate and work in clusters. So how do you think things are going to change, and how are we planning now for the next 6 months or the 1 year versus 2 years now? Either of you can start taking that on. Kelly?
Yeah, sure. I'll go. Yeah. And I
Okay,
think,
Darby, there
yeah,
you go.
absolutely. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to talk with you and Kelly and talk about what the future really does look like. And it's great to have these different perspectives from HR to architecture and design, because they actually meet up more than someone might think. So, I really appreciate the question, because the most important point here is that short-term planning has really translated into just anticipation of change now. So long-term planning is absolutely the new model. And the second critical change has been the role in new roles, actually, and responsibilities and the needs that have come with the virtual workforce. So you touched on, why people love living in San Francisco, and what they love about what they do is that flexibility. So how does that translate into what we're looking at now? So the recent changes and really thus the new normal brings an important opportunity for businesses to take a critical look and re-examine the how behind the why, from how business is conducted, from a product innovation, from how people travel to collaborating on logistics. And I know Kelly will probably talk a little bit about that with office design, and also just looking at how businesses are reshaping and reconfiguring and even reorganizing, resulting in the need to implement such a solid and clear business continuity along with their HR strategy. And the landscape of running a business just translates into the need now more than ever for data-driven decisions, making planning critical. And there are just a number of considerations when it comes to planning for businesses, including that human capital strategy, communication, financial crisis response, workplace safety, office space, succession planning, and also reorientation to the new model of the workplace, because it really is now such an extension into somebody's home, right? So we have to look at what that looks like from a relocation or comp, or maybe they don't relocate, but they're working from home full time. So planning is the foundation of success and must be a priority for that long-term viability and scalability of the business.
Well, and, Darby, I love what you said about, the next 6 months are, and, the solutions that are happening are really about, the short term. If you need people to get back into the office, what do you need to do so that people feel safe and healthy and can do their work? But what we have been seeing, and the discussions we've been having with our clients, is that everybody's acknowledged this pivot point in workplace, and that they're not really focused on the short term, they're really focused on the long term. And just like you said, what does that mean for the future of workplace, and how do you accommodate the spectrum of the workforce, from the people that want to be in the office? Gensler's own research points to 70% of people on some level do want to work in the office a certain amount of days a week, versus a smaller percentage that fundamentally wants to work from home forever. So what does that kind of spectrum of workplace look like? And then also, to your point about the age range of the workforce as well, because every group has different circumstances, and and in terms of what it means for cities, we totally agree. The younger workforce, they want to be in cities, they want to hang out with their friends, they really want to leverage everything that a city has to offer. And so how do you accommodate that within the workplace as well? So it's a really interesting time, I think, to be involved in this.
And you mentioned the workforce, the younger workforce, and how does this actually impact the supply chain, as we call it, right? On the talent's perspective, and then creating space or not, so that you can attract talent.
Yeah, so I'll take that, and I'd love to hear from Kelly as well, and so it's, when we think about that, technology has squished the barriers, right, with looking at talent. But we do have to be really intentional to what that talent management philosophy looks like. So how do we get the right people doing the right things at the right times in terms of that? Because the supply chain has to be the movement of capital, of people, of ideas across the borders, right? And an idea that worked at this time last year may not even be possible, right? It may even require further review due to regulatory changes or decreased demand depending on the product line. So when we're looking at that and how that translates into talent, we have to really assess, what does that look like? And we can touch on some productivity, points as well. But getting back to what Kelly, was saying about that need to be interactive still, and maybe that hybrid model. So how do we really innovate with that hybrid model to accommodate those new needs? And maybe they were existing and we're just aware of those needs, right? Of what our employees really want to attract and retain that top talent. And I'd love to hear, Kelly, what your ideas on that as well are.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting because, the pandemic has really pushed to the forefront, topics that we were already talking about. But I think this breakthrough that we've now decoupled the notion of being at your desk equals productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, for the most part, has been able to work from home. I think there's an interesting conversation that's happening now is, how long, can a company continue to innovate and grow based off of, the social and cultural capital that they had established before this happened? And how do companies that have, started in the midst of what's been going on, how do they create a culture, and how do they, continue to hire? But I think, to your point, we used to talk about the war for talent was based on amenities, who could go bigger, who could offer more. And the reality is the new war is talent. And so what this has brought to light is that you can really source talent from anywhere, in the country and the world, and they don't necessarily have to be geographically located, to your hub. And so, what does that mean for workplace? Does it mean that we start to talk about a hub and spoke model where, you have a headquarters, but you have these satellite offices that help support workers that want to, be a part of the company culture, want a physical place to go occasionally, but that's located, where they are somewhere else in, maybe a more remote part of the country. We've been talking a lot about like, Boise, Bozeman, Montana, these places that offer a different lifestyle and an opportunity for people to have maybe more of a work-life nature balance that the cities don't offer.
Yeah. I just learned of a new city in Montana called West Yellowstone, and maybe I'm just ignorant, but I didn't even know it existed. My girlfriend said, I just bought a house there. I said, where is that? And so I've been all of a sudden seeing a lot of information about it. But, when you think about Montana, and when I saw a picture of the house, it was like expanse. There's not another house in sight, right? And that is so totally opposite of what we see, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area. And a term that has been coined, and I didn't even realize that this term existed, creative collisions, right? Where, people like to collaborate in groups, right? Where they like to meet and work together. Do you think that, maybe when you mentioned earlier, Kelly, the hub and spoke, or how does this mean, how are people going to continue to be innovative and creative? Is that going to be impacted somehow, or will people just learn a different way of doing things? What do you see?
Yeah, I think, the conversations we've been having, everybody acknowledges that there's magic that happens when we're together, physically. And that's almost irreplaceable. And so, I think a lot of what we're looking at is how do you do that with, a partial or half, remote workforce? And, how do you make those conversations and those interactions really intentional and have purpose? And I think that's the biggest thing that we're really starting to see as companies, not only building workplace, but really building culture and I guess even addressing, their meeting behaviors and habits and protocols, which goes to a whole other level of kind of management and design, which, I think Darby can speak to. How do you also start to structure those parts and pieces so that, if you're not in the office, you still feel as valued and you still feel like you're a part of the conversation, and you're not missing out from those casual collisions that always happen that spark that idea that you would have never thought about before. So I think it's a challenge. I don't think anybody has solved it. I think everybody's acknowledging it's probably the biggest challenge we face, as being a part of companies and workplace.
And I agree with Kelly so much. And I love some of the terminology that you're using. And I love the word, that it's magic, right? When we're together, we've seen that. I mean, we know that we need each other. We know that great things happen, and that's how innovation happens and we move forward. And really, what we've been talking about today is transformation. It's about reshaping the past into that new future. It's about taking that hybrid model that makes sense for the business, building, as you were talking about, that structure and culture, and including the initiatives. And there may be trial and error as organizations find that right mix of elements to obtain the desired results. And you know what? That's okay. Because as you said, we're all in this together. We're doing this together, and it's okay. And we need to allow ourselves the space to be creative and collaborative and provide the tools to do that. And I was thinking of, Darlene, the image of that big house, right? And how do they get the technology in that house, right? So it's just looking at what the employee needs are, how do we get them what they need? And then also, it's important to look at the several components of building that structure and strategy. Because you're going to want to take a look at your DEI strategy. You're going to want to, take a look at your talent management philosophy again. How are employees even assimilated into your culture when they start? So you've attracted that great talent, but how are they assimilated? What does that look like? What kind of mechanisms are set up so that they start feeling like they provide value from day one, which is very critical to employee success. Also, what training needs might need to take place with the new productivity standards, as Kelly was talking about, or with the new technology that is need to use. I mean, gosh, I knew Zoom existed, but I wasn't a Zoom champion before, the pandemic. It just wasn't there, right? And then also looking at the policies, looking at your company policies and how are they impacted, what's working, what's not working, what changes need to happen going forward, so that you do have that architecture and structure for your business to move forward and allow for that collaboration. And again, as Kelly said, allow for that magic to happen.
Well, and really fast, I love this conversation because I think the other part that is really critical is, nobody can see the future. And anybody that promises a solution, I have a hard time with, but being able to be comfortable with the next, year and a half of being, iterative and trial and error. I work a ton with technology companies, and if you think about the mindset of how they release products, while they do a ton of work and research and, user integration to put out a product that, betters our lives, they're still never perfect. And so, that's why you get updates every 2 weeks on your iPhone or some other app. And so it's almost like if you can think of workplace in the same way, especially over the next 2 years, I think, where, based on the information we have now, based on the lofty goals we all have for the future, what does that look like? But being able to respond, I think, to your point, getting user employee feedback on a rapid basis to say, this is working really well. Let's continue to push this forward. And hey, acknowledging that this, was a great idea, but it epically failed, and acknowledging that that's fine and we're going to move on from that, I think is a shift that not a lot of people have maybe grasped yet. It's a little, it's uncertain, and it's a little bit scary, right? But I think there's so much opportunity in what we can discover through that process.
We talked about being flexible, and then we talked about we talked about data. How are companies dealing with that now? I mean, first of all, it was all this was literally everybody had to be reactional and just say, you know what, how to deal with it right away. And now that we're in this kind of new normal, companies have to look at, you know, what is going on, how are they collecting the data, and what are they finding? What are you all seeing?
I don't know if Darlene, you want to take that first, or I can talk, at least from our perspective. You know, we internally have a lot of tools to work with, you know, ourselves and our clients to gauge, you know, uh, employee feedback. And, you know, and what's great is we can tailor them, you know, to what we, you know, what our clients want to get out of it. And so I think, you know, constantly putting that survey and that ask out there, you know, because the way we feel today is I don't think the way we felt back in April. And so what has changed since then? You know, are people getting more comfortable with the technology, with working from home? Are people more frustrated than ever, and being able to, you know, adjust your solutions based off of, you know, what your employees are saying? I think is really critical. And, you know, a lot of our clients have similar mechanisms internally to really gauge, you know, the commitment level and, you know, kind of the cultural level of what the feedback they're getting from their employees. So I think companies that are really engaged in that kind of constant feedback loop are the ones that are going to come out of this more successful than others that are making maybe more top-down decisions.
Absolutely. And I could not agree more with what Kelly is saying. The feedback mechanism and the feedback loop is more important now than ever, because you have to understand what's happening in your business. You have to understand what the employees, you know, what's happening with them. Also what's happening though with the daily operations of their position. How is that impacted? So, you know, it's so important too that you have that accurate data so that you can interpret. You know, that's so critical to ensure that the business has clearly defined metrics. With any changes, you know, business have to develop adoption metrics that truly measure the success of the change that you're going through. You know, what's next? And even if it doesn't work, you know, if we talked about, but as long as you have those clear metrics, that's how you can use it to make the decision. And, you know, and although it may not be a presumption to everyone in business, you know, change practitioners we're really accustomed to the idea that organizational change can be connected to a temporary decrease in organizational performance, because we don't work in you know, if you build it, they will come economy any longer, right? So if we look at go-to-market strategy or emerging markets, you know, or new marketing avenues or product rollouts, even entire business units, you know, these are just a few vital pieces of the puzzle that can either succeed or completely fall flat without that appropriate level of analysis. Because right now, the economy is moving at such a pace that a new venture or a new product can move from inception to success to bankruptcy in months. So, you know, when we're looking at the sources of the data, it's so important because it can range from employee engagement surveys, you know, all the way to the internal metric-driven tools. But the bottom line is that businesses need to know what's working and what's not working to make those meaningful decisions that drive the business forward, but also keep your talent and let you understand what's happening in your business while they're working on the business.
So we first talked about performance, right? And whether or not there's innovation and whether or not there's creativity. And I'm starting to hear that, okay, we have to measure whether or not they're happy now. How do we keep employees engaged, right? Are they happy being, you know, working from home or with the current vibe? I don't think really a lot of people are. I think in general, we are still social animals, right? I know I am. And so what can companies do, or what are companies doing or think about actually when you think about team building or making sure you know, keep the employees engaged? I know we're talking at tools that are maybe available.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to, you know, what we're doing and what we're seeing. It's, you know, we all live in, you know, I think we use Zoom now like Kleenex, right? It's like whatever platform, it doesn't matter, it's just Zoom. we're in essentially, at least I know I am in a Zoom literally all day long, from the beginning of my day until the end of my day. And so it's highly structured. And I think what's interesting is when we were in the office, when we look at like mentorship as an example, in between my meetings, something, stopped short. I was able to see a designer that was working, and I was able to go over and quickly work on them with a sketch and then walk away. It was a 5-minute interaction, but it helped them, move their day along. And so now what we're seeing is having a lot more rigor around having intention and purpose with connecting with people across these platforms, and that kind of face-to-face interaction is super critical to ensure that we're still maintaining the cultural connection that we need to have. I also think what we've been doing is Gensler is a very hyper-focused cultural company, and that's one of the reasons I love working there. And so how do we take the rituals that we had when we were in the office, and which ones translate to this virtual world, and then what new rituals do we have to create to make sure that we're staying connected on not just a work level, but as a social and a more human level.
And I absolutely love what Kelly is saying about the connection. That's the two words. It's connect and engage, in offering a variety of the virtual activities that connect that human side with the business side. And Kelly's visual of being able to walk over and help somebody, with a project is so important that we do that virtually, and that we're really creative about what that looks like. So ask your employees what they want. Ask them. They probably know. I mean, just like with most leaders, your team knows exactly what needs to be done. So ask them that they know. And also just maybe on the fun side too. I mean, let's open it up there. When we think about that, think about other activities that could happen, like virtual happy hours or even virtual bingo. I've had clients play virtual bingo with their teams. I've had some clients who have coffee with their teams, and they bring their coffee mug, and they have contests with who has the most interesting coffee mug. And it's very interesting to see how people do make those connections. And I can see, especially with holidays coming up and different celebrations that coming up, connecting those. But, and also connecting those back to the value that they're providing in the work that they do every day. So that's taking a look at rewards and recognition as well, and making sure that, just as Kelly was saying, that those programs are translating into the virtual environment, and that's really easy to do. And there's an app for that. There's lots of great things out there. There's apps for wellness initiatives as well. Through TriNet, we offer everybody active as part of our wellness initiatives, and it's so fantastic because people will do contests with each other and do yoga contests or workout contests, or people do cooking contests. I've had clients do that as well. And it really does help bring creativity as well to the workplace, because you see conversations really blossom out of some of these activities. It can be very powerful.
So a different type of creativity coming out of doing something totally not related to work, right? And then working through that. That's really cool. So we're talking about piloting a bunch of things then.
Yeah.
So how do you think that's going to impact what's going on later on? I mean, from a, like the boss is always looking at, okay, I need to see that this project is done. They're always looking about deliverables and are we meeting the KPIs? But the thing is that, again, we're in this world where we have to be resilient, right? We have to think of what new projects we have to think of, or new way of doing things. Kelly, you mentioned earlier, you have to make sure you're checking in, but you have to do it a different way. Like I have so many one-on-ones now. It's scheduled. It's not funny, but you need to do it, because if you don't schedule anything anymore, it's not going to happen because you're not seeing them, right? And then so again, to your point, it's very intentional. So what does this mean from an HR perspective, and then also from even a design perspective? I'd like to hear some of your challenges.
I'll take this one first. Absolutely. So we've talked about an awful lot. We've talked about human capital strategy, talent management philosophy. We talked about culture, and in truly HR transformation could be a whole separate webinar. So let me try to just unpack a few of the critical things that we're seeing. And I loved how, Darlene, you were just talking about that, you have one-on-ones, but business has to get done. So how do we make room for what needs to happen now? And how does that translate into still getting the business done? And I think it comes down really to clear and consistent communication with the workforce. And that is just going to remain one of the most important elements of business continuity and success. And that may be looking at the communication plan. And that's, simply just a plan to provide needed information to your employees and what that timeline looks like. So the components of the plan involve, you need to make sure that you understand who's going to receive the information, when the information is even shared, and how the information and where the information is provided. Like, is it during team meetings? Is it during one-on-ones? So that you're making the most of those new times that you have. So a one-on-one before may have been something like getting to know you or just talking. Now it could be real intentional about the results that need to come from those one-on-ones. Because without that communication plan or that dissemination of information, when we look to the accountability piece, right, you can't hold somebody accountable for something they weren't aware of, right? So it's going to be very important to have that mechanism in place to share the information, to create that awareness of the adoption and accountability. But again, you really need to be nimble in how you look at that. So if it's not working, change it.
Yeah, I love that. I think the other part of it is, and I see this within our own environment. It's somehow, we were always working a lot, but in this, world, it seems like we're working more, which is really interesting. And I think it's maybe, just a perception piece, but I think also recognizing that, yes, we need to get our job done, but we also need to acknowledge that people need release and they need space to think, and that's okay. And that should be able to happen within your workday. So, an acknowledgement from the leadership of companies to say, yes, we have deadlines. Yes, we have stuff we need to get out the door, but it's okay to take a break. It's okay to let your mind wander or, take a walk. We had this whole kind of initiative early on when we were in shelter in place in San Francisco, where, we purposely told people to, get outside at lunch, don't schedule meetings at lunch, take time for yourself to recharge, because everybody was just, on this mentality of go, go, go. We have to schedule a lot of meetings, and you have to remind people that it's okay to take a break and that you get better results from people when you let that happen.
Hey, Darlene, quickly, with what Kelly was saying, I could not echo that more. With when we see clients doing that we do see the feedback of, wow, employees really appreciate it. They're actually more committed to the project than they were before, because they're invested in their success, not only in the project, but as a human being. And I loved how Kelly was talking about the space, and be intentional about the space that you do provide. I mean, within reason, what makes sense to the business, of course, but it really is important to give people that space to think. And it does look different. I mean, we don't even have access to the same research we had before, not really. So, even marketing is so different now. So it's really being intentional to give space, and also if they need support in that, to provide them with that support mechanism.
Yeah, I think that for me, when I think about community now, we're all of a sudden, because everybody's working from home and a lot of people are not even working in the same city they were hired for, right? Everybody is spread out. I have a team member, she's actually in Hawaii now. It's like, okay, since everything is virtual anyway, go spend time with your parents. It's okay. And I think it's great. Because you have to be happy, right? Working from home, going into the office is one thing, but working from home where it's a small space and you don't get to stretch out a bit, where the creative juice is going to be flowing or flowing from. But what about, when we think about cities and we think about community, what about community stewardship? How do you think that is being impacted now? I mean, yeah, I remember during the beginning of COVID, everybody was like, yes, we have to do a drive for this, we have to do a drive for that. And now it's 6 months later. What is going to happen? How is that going to change? How is that going to be impacted? Does anything that we're talking about today even influence that, or is impacted by that? That's a long question. But
well, yeah, I mean, I have to say, having lived in San Francisco for the past 13 years, this emergence of this, this outdoor culture that's started to happen, stemming from the fact that we couldn't eat inside of restaurants. So restaurants, pushing their way into the city streets and, commandeering what used to be for cars. For me, it's been really invigorating to walk around the city and see, people outdoors and, for a place that has relatively good weather through the majority of the year. I was always really surprised that it felt like when I went to Chicago, they had so much more outdoor space, even though half of their year is, kind of inhospitable. And why weren't we really embracing that in San Francisco? And so that combined with, I think, a lot of our clients really re-examining what it means to be a partner in the community and in, especially, downtown San Francisco. Do they have a newfound responsibility to help reinvigorate, the streetscape and the storefronts and become partners with small businesses rather than, kind of staying in their ivory tower? So I think what I would really love to see, and, we've been having these conversations, so we'll see how they move forward, but, really, building landlords and owners taking a look at their ground floor and how do we create a more indoor-outdoor experience, and how do tenants interact with the public in a way that, re-engages with the community, makes the cityscapes feel vibrant. And like I said, again, doesn't mean that, this company is now in a tower and nobody else can touch it, but they truly become partners with the community.
Public-private partnerships, then, is what I'm hearing. We have to engage more. That's really interesting. Do you have anything to share about that from your perspective, Darby?
I do. And, I really loved Kelly touching on the partnership aspect and you touching on that. It's something that we saw, as Kelly touched on with the pandemic, is a different shift in the focus, because with everybody staying home, but we were still all in this together, but what happens to the community? So the community really did have a shift here of what did that look like? When did people see each other? What did community engagement be? Because for us, for example, where we are, we couldn't have the community events, and we had volunteer activities. And so one of the great things that TriNet did was and some of our clients did is we incorporated an additional floating holiday for people to take advantage of those opportunities when they when they arose, because now they could be done online. Maybe there was, a Facebook charity event instead of meeting in the park about it, or meeting in the park and just staying away from each other, but being intentional, right, about that time. But, something that in relation to TriNet, in relation to the partnerships, I get so passionate about this, so I apologize, is that, we really partner with small to mid-sized businesses because it's our passion to help drive economies at the community levels, and that's what we continue to do. So we continue to partner with our clients to help them. And, our leadership really took an active role in explaining different programs that were available to help those businesses stay afloat, but also grow. I mean, we saw clients scale and grow because all of a sudden the demand for the product was incredible and it just took off. And so it really impacted the supply chain as well as that business. But scaling in this pandemic is a different world than it was, because the ideas of 9 to 12 months ago just don't work. So it was a true partnership, and we continue to partnership with those small to mid-sized businesses in the area. And we love to see the communities grow.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, even in the work that we're doing, we are finding that brick and mortar doesn't really mean anything anymore. It just means where you're doing your business from, especially if you're in a sales business, right? It's like there are no borders anymore. You can sell globally, and we're trying to help companies realize that goal as well. So yeah, just realizing that this world is really bigger than, your neighborhood, especially for SMBs, right? I think that's really important. That's great. I just want to be a little mindful of the time. It's 10:43. Maybe we could take some questions from the audience before we continue our conversation. Does that work?
Please.
Okay. We have one question, and I think this is going to be for Darby. How do small to medium-sized businesses need to look at compliance around employment law with a distributed workforce? Which is a really good question, because
that's a great question.
Everybody's in the same state anymore, right? And how do employers deal with that?
Oh gosh, yeah, no, that's it's so important that we talk about that. And as you just said, compliance now expands the world, but not only that, I mean, think about it. If we think about what happened in March from what's happened today, the enormity of the changes that we've seen on the regulatory landscape, sometimes it was changing minute by minute. I would literally be in the middle of a communication with someone and have to change what I was saying because the rules changed or the guidance was expanded, right? So we really need to, take a look at how do we partner with somebody? Because really the best thing, and I do think the smartest thing to do is partner with someone who that is their expertise, such as TriNet, but I mean, someone who that is their expertise with this landscape. Because honestly, it is not even fair to put that kind of burden on one department or one person or one HR person. There are just far too many complexities to put that on one person's shoulders or even a department's shoulders right now. The risk is too great through this.
And Kelly, I've actually also curious about what's going on at Gensler. I mean, I know you guys already have a network of offices throughout the world, but how is management dealing and working with your in-house designers now? I'm just curious.
Oh, well, I'm going to be upfront. The HR component is not my wheelhouse. So I don't want to speak to that, but we're dealing with the same issues that every other company is. Where we have designers that are maybe young and they want to go home and spend time with their family in Texas or the East Coast, and so we're navigating the same challenges of what does it mean when somebody has shifted their primary location from San Francisco to another part of the country or even another part of the world. We're a global company, and I think we're working through those challenges. But again, to go back to I think our earlier conversation with Darby about clear communication and expectations of people, and our staff being really transparent to raise their hand and say, hey, like, I need to go work somewhere else. Is that okay? What do I need to do to make that happen? And for us, as a employer to give them and arm them with the information that they need and help them weigh all the decisions they need to make in order to move forward. So it's tricky, and yes, I would say rely on the professionals.
So communication, setting expectations, work with a professional expert like TriNet. That's key. So I just want to let our participants know today that you can still send us questions if you want to ask a question of Kelly from Gensler or from Darby of TriNet. Feel free to type in the question in the Q&A section. We have about 10 minutes, 13 minutes left to today's program. So anyway, and until we get another question, I just wanted to know if there's something that we didn't talk about that you thought about that you would want to share at this moment, Kelly or Darby?
Something that Kelly just touched on is when someone wants to work in Texas, right? And maybe they're in San Francisco and they say, okay, I want to go work in Texas. Something to consider is do they want to work there temporarily or are they asking to be relocated? And what kind of relocation programs or policies do you might need to re-examine to take a look to make sure that there's fairness and equity across the board there? And also compensation. So how is compensation being looked at? So if someone does move to an area that may be a different, benchmark there, it's really important to understand how that gets communicated to employees of how their compensation will be evaluated or reevaluated going forward with performance metrics, and what that may mean, because there might be employees that are very surprised that they reach the top limit of that certain grade. Let's say the company has grades in place, and they're very surprised because in their area, that is the top grade where it wouldn't be someplace else. So it's really about being transparent about the compensation philosophy, as well as how employees will be evaluated with those.
Now that you mentioned that, I remember some of the tech companies in San Francisco and the Bay Area, they said that, hey, if you are thinking of moving out of the Bay Area, you're going to be getting a pay cut. So what kind of reactions have you heard from any of your clients that have actually done that, or have any of your clients started doing that, Darby?
So I want to be careful what I say, because but I can say in general, right? What I've seen with some of the clients that have absolutely have done that, and they have been transparent, but they did call and say, okay, what are we looking at from a risk perspective? What are best practices with communicating this? And also they found that there was some interesting conversations about how to be creative with maybe some extra incentives that were in place that maybe they needed to look at with their new location. And so it really was being transparent about, okay, if you make this decision, this is the result that is going to be in place. And this is because this is in line with how we create fairness and equity across the globe with the role, because it really has to be based on the role, not the employee.
One thing, I was just going to say, to add on to that, but not from the HR perspective, I think what's been really interesting for me personally to see is how this has really unlocked our ability to really craft the best teams from across, our firm to dedicate to our clients and our projects. And I think, and it's not that we weren't collaborating in that way before, but this has almost made it. We talk a lot about how, Zoom and meeting, online has, kind of equalized the playing field, but it's also, I think, brought down the barriers of physical location in a way that I think has the opportunity, at least for us as a design firm, to unlock the most potential from our design teams to really create, the future of, for me, it's workplace, airports, travel, retail, we work literally in every, kind of sphere. But for me, that's really exciting to be able to really partner with my colleagues across, I have a design team that is partially in Paris, partially in San Francisco, and, partially, working from Texas right now. And it's like, it doesn't matter, where before that might've been seen as a logistical challenge, it's really broken down those barriers, which I think is really exciting for companies to start to think about, how do you structure teams moving forward? And it's not necessarily about, who's here and who's there. Just like a side note.
Just getting the job done. That's all it was.
Yeah, and Darlene, it's so interesting. What Kelly was saying too brought forth something else. San Francisco, and this is on your website, right? That San Francisco tends to be where productivity is typically higher than other locations, if we look at that. And organizations should be defining what being quote unquote at work means, as along with how to meet those employee needs. So if you have teams in Paris and you have them in Texas and you have them in San Francisco, you're also talking about some time zones, right? And when it's best to collaborate. So, the question there would be, what does that business continuity look like? And then how is the work to be done? Like, how is that success going to be measured that might be different from before? But also, when Kelly was talking, it reminded me, like, how are vulnerabilities going to be identified? So what does that look like for the business and how they're doing that? Because, you might need to have different flexibility for some job constraints that you didn't have before, which may shift, from an HR perspective, your policies or, the HR transformation initiatives. So it's going to be really critical to define what productivity is going to look like going forward.
Yeah, productivity is really important. Again, the one-on-ones where you're measuring and holding the team member accountable for what they're doing. I know that's what I've been trying to do. In many ways, it's a lot more apparent, but I'm just sharing my experience in that space too. So
I think the other thing for people to also think about is that productivity does not equal innovation.
right.
And so,
Yeah.
So it's while our teams are productive, while they're getting their work done, how are we unlocking the creativity to really innovate? And again, like I said, I don't think anybody has a solution yet. And I think everybody is really focused on what that means for each individual company and how they move that forward. And I think, again, like I said, the next 6 months to a year are, I think, really critical for companies to determine, what that means for them and how they move that part forward. Because again, I think they're two very different goals.
Yeah, which, I mean, we keep going back to, so what is really the future of work going to look like 12 months down the road? Hopefully, we're all hoping that things can be kind of going back to normal in the net after 12 months. So what is going to be the new normal? Are companies really going to be able to maintain a workforce that is not, living in one physical space or location or region anymore? Is that going to be possible, or what are we looking at, right?
I mean, I can answer really quickly. Everything we've been talking about is this spectrum, right? And not every company will address it in the same way. But right. I think, fundamentally, it's about creating equity between the people who are not in the room and the people who are in the room. And whether that's leveraged through, technology, how do we leverage what technologies are already out there and what do we need to do to emphasize them moving forward? Mm-hmm. What new technology breakthroughs will happen? For us, we're really studying, what does that mean for a meeting room, right? Like, it used to be you had four walls, you had a monitor on the wall and you had a table, but how do you create more equity even within the footprint of the room? Do they need to grow so that we're able to, accommodate camera technology that captures people moving around the room and all of the different things that are happening? We're not sure. And then how do you bring that, the tools and technology into people's homes so that they have what's available in the office? And so I think for us, it's, over the next, we've already been exploring it since April and are continuing to, iterate on what that looks like. But I do think it's going to be this, this spectrum of workplace that really is trying to take into account the purpose and, the focus on why you're in the office, but then also how do you really interact with your colleagues that are remote in a really meaningful and productive way.
And I had a question and I lost my train of thought. Yikes. It was a question about the workplace, the technology. I swear to God, I lost my train of thought.
It's all right.
It's all right.
Happens to me every day.
Darby, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, Kelly mentioned this earlier, that really the workplace is now extended to the home, right? So we have to look at how that's impacted. And I loved how Kelly was talking about the spectrum and looking at technologies and how to use them. But from an HR perspective, there is a real key component that we've touched on earlier, though it's making sure that, do you have an expense policy? Who's paying for those technologies? What are the policies surrounding the use of the technology? How about cybersecurity? It's going to be really important to understand those kind of considerations. I hate to say this, but I have had a client who was on a webinar and the cameo that happened in the back was completely inappropriate for the workplace. I mean, really inappropriate. So, it's about, what do the rules of engagement look like when we're using technology and we're meeting virtually and in the hybrid model back in person? What does the cybersecurity look like? What do the policies look like? So there's a lot to unpack when we just say, using technology, because it truly is, an extension to the home and vice versa, and to the phones and to the car and to, if we're working in the airport, right? It really does translate to that. So we need to make sure that we have that clear and consistent decisions and that those decisions are disseminated.
And I think you're reading my mind because I was going to ask about the home component. But Darby, I have a question about also, how OSHA laws. I mean, if you're working in you're in an office space and everybody sees the rules, right, governing a workspace. How do you make sure that the workplace is actually, approved or what have you at home now? Because everybody has a different way of working at home. Some people work at a dining table like me, right? I have a dining table that I share with my husband. That's our workspace now. We don't have a proper quote unquote office space at home. So how do you make sure that that's actually implemented correctly, or are employers going to be held accountable for that? How do you make sure that employees are taking care of themselves? How do you do that now? I mean,
that is such a great question, and there's a lot to unpack, and I'm looking at the clock, so you have 1 minute. But I will say this in 30 seconds, the most important part of that is to partner with someone who understands how to mitigate that risk with workers' comp, because it truly might be different depending on the role that the person has in your organization. But look at the guidelines that are available to you, because we can't go into everybody's home to inspect. So the main thing to do is communicate what those expectations are, be intentional about those expectations. Also be intentional about what the consequences if they don't follow those expectations are. But it's really to understand and then clearly communicate, and partner with someone like Gensler who can help you to understand what that workspace might look like even in somebody's home. And then also with TriNet, so that we can get you in touch with a risk consultant who can talk to you about what that might look like for your business, because there is a lot there, and we could have a whole webinar on that.
I'm sure we can. Okay, that being said, it is 11 o'clock. I want to be mindful, and I know that Kelly, thank you so much for down from the airport. Have a safe trip. I know these are very challenging times for everyone, and we all have to stay safe. Thank you everyone for joining. Please remember that that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available for you to look back upon. Contact information for everyone will also be available. And with that, I want to thank Darby for joining us, as well as Kelly, and for all you out there who are joining us today. Have a very great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye. Take care.